Hey everyone, welcome back to the American Juche Study Group. My name is Noah Shank, and I am the founder of it. I'm a Korean American. I'm also an anti-imperialist activist with the Center for Political Innovation. And I'm also the editor of this newish text, Juche for American Workers, which compiles the writings of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-Il, and will be the text used for our weekly study sessions. Now, the American Juche Study Group is a broad initiative including people of all races, religious backgrounds, and political affiliations who are interested in learning the ideology of the Korean Revolution. We bring with us a spirit of intellectual charity and goodwill toward all humankind. We refuse to accept the hateful caricature of North Korea presented in American media, and instead want to learn the ideas that have held the DPRK together for so long and able to withstand circumstances that would most certainly cause any other government on earth to fall. We come with open minds and diversity of thought, and share one goal: peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula in the context of a world without war and poverty, in which every nation is enabled to grow and thrive to its fullest potential. Now, we do ask that if you are studying with us today, if you could please send a small $5 contribution to support our work, because we do so much to support peace and development around the world. We are the anti-imperialist voice in America. And, unfortunately, doing this kind of stuff isn't free. Food costs money, and having events costs money. And unfortunately, the reality of the world we live in is that things cost money. So if you could please just donate $5, it would be gratefully appreciated so that we can continue to do the work that we do. I'd also like to remind people who are watching live that it is an open study session. So, if you have anything to contribute, there is also a link in the chat and in the description if you'd like to join and contribute anything. So this week is the penultimate text of this volume of Juche for American Workers. And I'm using penultimate in the actual sense of the word, right? A lot of people think penultimate means like the best. Well, actually, penultimate means second to last. So this is the second to last study session within Juche for American Workers, Volume 1. Of course, that does not mean that this will be the last American Juche Study Group session. I am working on Juche for American Workers Volume 2. And in the meantime, before we can get that printed, I can always, go through the archives, of the texts of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-Il to find short pieces that we can work on. But yeah, penultimate, it's one of those funny words. It's like decimate, right? A lot of people think decimate means to like beat really thoroughly, but actually decimate means to kill 1 in every 10 people. It's comes from the Roman Empire. When they would conquer a city, they would decimate the population, killing 1 in every 10 people. So there you go. But the text that we're going over today is the philosophical principle of the Juche idea. It's actually very interesting. It's one of the deeper texts that is included here, and it's by not Kim Il-sung, it's by Kim Jong-Il. And this is sort of the meat and potatoes of the philosophical underpinnings of Juche, as it pertains, I guess, to metaphysics, as it pertains to, the field of what they call metaphysics, which is how is it that we know what we know, and what is the nature of human beings. That is going to be the topic of today. So the philosophical principle of the Juche idea. The Juche idea is a new philosophical thought which centers on man. It centers on humanity. And it is the principle of the Juche idea, which is a man-centered philosophy and explains man's position and role in the world. Now, I'm sure that could be taken out of context to mean, here's Kim Il-sung being a big sexist meanie, right? Because, it's a man-centered ideology, but we're talking about humanity. We're talking about human beings and the nature of human beings when we talk about a man-centered philosophy. So I guess we can go to our next quote, our next slide, which is, man is the master of everything, means that he is the master of the world and of his own destiny. Man decides everything, meaning that he plays the decisive role in transforming the world, shaping his own destiny, which I think is a huge departure from a lot of what we hear in the West. I mean, the idea of predetermination is like a hugely popular thing, I think. And I don't mean to say strictly in the sense of philosophy. When we talk about empiricist determinism or determinism, right? There are some people who believe that you don't actually decide anything, that it's all God's plan. Or there are other people that, are like sort of sciencey people, right? They'll say like, oh, well, like it's all just atoms, right? It's all random chance and atoms, and you actually have no agency over your life. But this is the Malthusian worldview. This is the worldview of the ruling class, and it emanates into all aspects of our culture, I think, today. This idea that you don't have any agency over your life, and I see it really commonly online. I see mental health stuff. It gets promoted a lot in women's spaces, for example, the so-called wellness stuff. The idea that oh, well, you're just mentally ill, so don't do anything. You have anxiety, you have depression or whatever, and they take mental health or a psychoanalytic understanding of oneself not as an excuse to learn about yourself and maybe learn how you can do things in a different way, or learn your limitations so that you can better yourself, right? But rather, you should learn your limitations so you can decide what you're not going to be able to do, which is a very unhealthy way of looking at things. And I also increasingly, I see a lot of self-help content oriented towards men, a lot of stuff that pretends to be philosophical, that's oriented towards men. The black pill, right? That's very common now. Looks maxing, people like clavicular or androgenic or whoever. And that's like this, the idea that your genetics predetermine everything in your life, etc. Which but do folks have any comments on man is the master of everything, meaning he is the master of the world and his destiny?
Yeah. I mean, following up on what you're saying, Noah, the patient says, I have frustration. And then the doctor says, oh, really? Then set it on the table for me. Oh, that's right. You can't, because frustration is an activity. But we're being taught that these things are, what was the term you said, anxiety or I don't remember what like condition you said, Noah, but it reminded these are part of life, and they are. But people are being told like, oh, you have this terrible incurable condition, or that's you need to sign up for all these medications and stuff.
Right. It's a learned helplessness, and that serves the ruling class. And right, you have to understand Juche as an ideology that comes out of anti-colonial revolutions, right? And as such is going to emphasize human beings' agency over the world, and their agency over changing the world. And there are a lot of people who they have no desire whatsoever to change the world. I think that's a very common thing as well, right? That in our society, right, a job is not seen as a labor that you are contributing to society, but rather it's just something that you do to get by, right? People don't view their job as a contribution to society. They don't view their job as, doctors. They don't see themselves as somebody who is caring for the sick necessarily. They view it as something that they do to make money, or somebody who, increasingly that makes it a lot easier for people to do these these meaningless sort of service sector jobs or whatever, right? And they don't take pride in what they do, but it's just something that you do, right? And I notice that a lot when I talk to people. It's like your job or what you're doing is not something that you are contributing to humanity. It's not something that you want to contribute to society, but rather it's this thing that you just do because that's what you do, and that's an unhealthy way of viewing the world. I think of too, when you talk about overproduction, you talk about, yeah, go ahead, Jessica. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I could finish. I mean, I think that you're making a great point. I just was going to make a point about, genetics and epigenetics, and the fact that you can control epigenetics, and that people confuse hereditary traits for genes, and they're not the same thing. So, I mean, the color of my hair, my eyes, that's not a genetic thing. That's it's a hereditary trait, and our quote epigenetics can be we are in control of that. And I'll make a point because I know this from working at the Cancer Society. If you have an identical twin sister and your mother, your grandmother, or your aunts, even your identical twin sister gets cancer, breast cancer, your odds of getting breast cancer are no more and no less than anyone else in your community or neighborhood. There you go. So if you've moved to New York and the rate is, let's say, 18%, well, that's your ability to get cancer because, again, it's what you eat, the air you breathe, the water. And capitalism wants us to believe that we are always victims and that we can never change, ourselves for the better or society.
Right. And I think, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention, since we're talking about philosophy,
go ahead, Caleb,
since we're talking about philosophy and existentialism, and the ability to make choices, didn't Louis Althusser, the big French Marxist philosopher, didn't he like murder his wife in a fit of insanity and then write a book about how, like, somehow it wasn't his fault or something like that? I don't know that whole story, but I know Louis Althusser is a really big deal for these people that are into this postmodernist kind of philosophical, irrationalist, pseudo-Marxist stuff on the campuses. And I believe, like, Louis Althusser was some big French communist intellectual, and he murdered his wife and then wrote a book about how it wasn't his choice or something.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not a fan of Althusser. And also these people, they're determinists, right? They think that everything is predetermined. And by the way, speaking about Stalin, there's the great story about Stalin. When he talked about, he's a big promoter of Lysenko, and Lysenko is the father of epigenetics. And so Stalin talked about how, as good Marxists, we need to question everything, including science under capitalism. And there was the question about water. And he says, why are we even having a conversation about whether drinking sewage water causes disease and whether this is caused by genetics? Rich people don't drink sewage water. He says that even if 100 people drink sewage water and let's say 20 die of cholera and 70 don't, that doesn't mean that people, or all 100% of them, are not ill in some way, shape, or form. Maybe they don't die now, or maybe in the future can cause health problems. Why don't we just give everyone fresh water? And
on the flip side too,
why was this even a debate in the West about how people dying of sewage water die because of their genetics and how they need to have vaccines? What does vaccines, and why don't you just clean the water up? Come on.
Yeah, and on the flip side too, a lot of the Lysenkoist stuff initially got dismissed as bunk, right? And it's often given as an example of Marxism tainting science or whatever. But for example, why is it that the CRISPR gene editing stuff has never been shown to be completely heritable to, like, the mosquitoes that they try to wipe out using it, right? I always found that interesting. And then also they've shown that, like, for example, I'm interested in this because I'm interested in bodybuilding and stuff like that. But, like, for example, if the mother, while she's pregnant, right, continues to exercise and maintains, like, good muscle mass and eating habits, they found that not only will the child have a stronger immune system as a result of that, but also the child will actually be more likely to be able to put on muscle. And the child will come out looking, like, more muscular, which I find to be very fascinating. But I think I was making a point earlier about people viewing their jobs as just something you do. I think that it taints conversations about overproduction as well, because you'll talk about a labor-saving technology, right? And I've experienced this many, many times. You're talking about a labor-saving technology and you say, well, yes, under capitalism, right, a self-driving car would be really bad, right? But we should live in a society where creating a self-driving car would destroy this, like, pointless chore that we call driving, and then that would free up people to do better things. And countless times I've had somebody sort of look at me puzzled and they say, yeah, but wouldn't people lose their jobs? And you say, well, yes, but the point is that that is a job that is not useful to society, and we should plan the economy so that they would find another sector of employment. And they look, but they say, yeah, but that would like change jobs. And I find that I have this conversation about AI and like any labor saving technology. This happens over and over and over again. People cannot think of a job as something more than a means of scraping by. I find that to be very interesting.
Right. And I mean, obviously the driving and editing are useful jobs right now, but I think that people are not seeing people are just wanting to see the negatives. Obviously, yeah, in this unplanned hellhole of an economy, people are out of a job, but like you're saying, there could be a carefully planned economy where people could have actually jobs that were more meaningful and creative, etc. It's really not that far off, and people just we have this perpetual problem of not being able to envision what we don't see already. I see Caleb's flashing something in front of the camera. I wonder what that is.
The only U.S. Army general ever to have been taken prisoner was General Dean, who was taken prisoner during the Korean War by the North Koreans. And he actually talked about how when he was in a prisoner of war camp held by the North Koreans, they taught him about this very issue. And I find this to be very inspiring. He talks about what it is the North Koreans taught him when he was in the prison camp in the final chapter. And he says what the political education they gave him. The one piece of political education they gave him was about racism in the United States. And they really talked about Jim Crow and stuff like that. And he says, another point is that through their labor unions, American workers complain about and fight against labor-saving devices because they put men out of work. Under communism, runs the theme, everyone tries to devise labor-saving equipment because there will be work for all at all times. In the beginning, everyone will have to work harder than he would like, long hours, but it will all come out right in the end with everyone's labor planned, no duplication, no human working for an individual rather than for society as a whole. Then there won't be excessive hours of labor and each will receive his requirement, right? So that's what General Dean was actually taught by the North Koreans in the POW camp. So this is his autobiography describing what it was like being held by the North Koreans. The only U.S. Army general. There have been Marine Corps generals held and other things, but he was the only U.S. Army general to have ever been captured. And he actually speaks quite positively of the North Koreans and the political education they gave him when he was a POW.
Who did he ever become politically active post education?
He did. He was kind of silent, after he came back, I guess. So what happened was the U.S. government declared him dead, which is fascinating. They declared that he had died and he was still alive and the North Koreans had him, but the U.S. government didn't want to get that out there. And so they just said that he was dead. And so he heard the broadcast and the North Koreans played it for him. And they're like, the U.S. government has declared you dead. You're just forgotten. And he describes that. And ultimately he did go back to the United States. And then he was kind of silent, but then during the Vietnam years, he started speaking up and he was really against the Vietnam War. And if you read the book, this book came out in 1968, 69. He does speak very positively of the North Koreans and talks about how they talked about racism and Jim Crow and things like that. And they talked about the problems of capitalism. And it's actually kind of interesting. I wouldn't say he's 100% pro North Korean, but for somebody who was held, you'd think you'd hate him. You know what I mean? He actually gives a rather sympathetic thing. And also he describes, there's a communist journalist named Wilfred Burchett, who was a communist journalist. He describes meeting Wilfred Burchett as the best experience ever, and his best bud, Wilfred Burchett, who was a pro-communist journalist who wrote books about the Korean War and stuff like that. So kind of interesting.
By the way, I had an uncle and he was taken prisoner and he said wonderful things about the North Koreans as well.
Yeah, I think of that episode of The Simpsons, right, where you have Principal Skinner, and he's talking about being held in a Vietnamese POW camp, and he's like, they had this soup, and I've spent years trying to find it. I've been gone mad, and a lot of the myths about the treatment of American POWs, it's like a huge propaganda thing, and I think like Vietnam gets very offended by the idea that John McCain promoted this idea that that the Vietnamese were torturing American POWs and stuff like that, and there's a huge like propaganda thing against Vietnam about how return the lost POWs and stuff like that. It's largely a myth created by the deep state and stuff like that. But I think we should move on to our next quote. Man, though material in existence, is not a simple material being. He is the most developed material being, and he is a special product of evolution in the material world. Man was already outstanding as he emerged from the world of nature. He exists and develops by cognizing and changing the world to make it serve him, whereas all other material lives maintain their existence through their subordination and adaptation to the objective world. He's sort of making that's the Engels point, right? That all other animals simply exist in the world, but human beings are the only ones who can master their environment. And then he goes on to make the point about why that is. Let me see if I can find the quote, because I didn't put it in there. Okay, man holds a special position and plays a special role as master of the world because he is a social being who has three traits. A human being is independent, creative, and conscious. He says these are the three traits that qualify a human. That all human beings are social beings, right? But that our sociality is in contradiction with these three other things: our independence, our creativity, and our independence, and our consciousness. And then he goes on to talk a little bit about that. Bring up the next quote. Oh, go ahead, Gavin. Go ahead.
Most evolutionists I talk to deny that there is free will. So I appreciate Kim Jong-Il acknowledging that there is human free will. Is this a Kim Jong-Il quote or a Kim Il-sung quote?
This is Kim Jong-Il, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, yeah, very interesting.
Well, the question of...
Caleb, you're muted.
The question of free will is like one of the like flaws in Marxism, so to speak, right? Where like Frederick Engels at one point clarified that, that Marx didn't believe in complete historical determinism, and that, the decisions of individuals is important. There's a book called The Role of the Individual in History by Plekhanov, the father of Russian Marxism, that is considered to be very important on that question. And this notion that there is no role for the individual in history, the individual is simply just enacting, material forces, versus the idea of the heroic individuals by themselves are what changes the course of history. Marxism synthesizes those two and says that, well, great individuals do exist, but they give voice to bigger forces other than themselves. That's kind of the standard Marxist answer. And the Plekhanov essay, The Role of the Individual in History, is widely studied and promoted. And it's also been denounced by the New Left, and they view it as like the basis of Stalin's cult of personality and stuff. I think it's interesting. No, is there a delay?
No. But okay, I'll break the ice, I guess. What you're talking about is, how that essay is denounced as something that was used for Stalin's cult of personality. Yeah, I think the cult of personality thing's kind of a weird phraseology, I guess you could say, because what exactly constitutes a cult of personality? Like, that's very fast and loose.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also I would like to get back to Caleb's point about historical materialism as it emerges, right? The idea that there are some people who think historical materialism means determinism, but I mean, you can just look at the history of Marxism, right? Because, right, there are a lot of people who will take historical materialism to mean, well, there are good people and bad people, right? There are good people who are proletarian, and there are bad people who are bourgeoisie or something like that. But just look at the history of Marxism. Frederick Engels owned a factory. Fidel Castro, his family were plantation owners. I mean, Lenin came from a minor noble family. I mean, the idea that, historical materialism simply says that, well, yes, your class, right, your economic interest, right, that is going to influence the way that you think on the one hand, and two, most people are just going to act in their own self-interest. I mean, that's a common critique of Marxism made by libertarians. Oh, well, people are just selfish and they want to act in their own self-interest. It's like, well, actually, that's what Marxism thinks. It's that, like, most people are going to act in their self-interest, and that by looking at the way in which different interests are, that's a way to understand the world. And that also, Marx's conception of history is building off of Hegel's conception of history. Right, Hegel had this idea, was the Hegelian idea of history was that there is this thing that exists out there, and it's called Weltgeist, which means world spirit, right? And the world spirit is sort of driving history forward. It's this unknowable thing which drives history forward, and that there are various beings who embody Weltgeist. There are these great figures within history who embody the spirit of the times. They embody the spirit of the world. And individuals like Napoleon was the example he used. He called him the revolution in boots. He called him. He said when he saw Napoleon invade Prussia, he saw the spirit of history moving forward. Right, and Hegel had this idea that like you have these grand historical figures, but it's not that the individual in of themselves is necessarily great. It's that they are embodying the spirit of the world, right? And he said that you can understand the spirit of the world through understanding contradictions, but you can only understand it in hindsight, right? That we can look back on these figures and say, oh, history was using them for this, that, and that, right? But Marxism takes, okay, well, yes, you do have these world historical figures, right? But they're not embodying something, this vague notion of world spirit. What they're embodying is the material forces existing of the time, right? That the world itself is acting on these great figures, right? And they themselves are in turn acting back, right? And then that it gives us the agency to understand why that's happening at the moment, as opposed to just in hindsight. And that gives you the agency to act and to change history, right? Marx has the famous quote, philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. So that's an important distinction to make about Marxism. So I think we can go on to the next quote. Okay. Independence, creativity, and consciousness are man's social qualities, which take shape and develop socially, historically, and materially. Man alone in the world lives and conducts activity in social relationship. He maintains his existence and achieves his aims socially. Independence, creativity, and consciousness are peculiar to man, the social being. Right, because it's like there are other creatures that we could say are, I guess, social, right? I guess you could say, right, eusocial insects like ants and bees. I guess they're social, right? They build their hives, and you could say, oh, well, a pack of wolves, I guess they're social. It's like it's a family of wolves, and they do X, Y, and Z. Or you could say lions, they're social, right? But they're not social in the way that human beings are social, right? Because there's a contradiction within human sociality, right? The human beings are inherently social, that we need to be around each other. And that is part of what makes us so great, our ability to work together to achieve things. But inside of us is also these three things. Like a human being also acts independently. A human being also has their own desires, has their own interests. A human being is also creative. A human being has a desire to create new things and to create new ways of interacting with the world. And a human being is also conscious of themselves. So he elaborates on that in a little bit, but I don't know if folks have comment on that, or if we can just. No? Okay. So I guess we can move on to the next quote because we are a little bit strapped for time, you know. So man is a being with independence. That is an independent social being. Independence is an attribute of social men who is desirous of living and developing in an independent way as master of the world and his own destiny. On the strength of his quality, man throws off the fetters of nature, opposes social subjugation, and all forms, uh, and uh, and puts everything at his own service. He continues, independence is the life and soul of a man, the social being. When independence is referred to as man's life and soul, it means social and political integrity. Man has a physical life and also a social and political integrity. The physical life is what keeps a man alive, a biological organism. Social and political integrity is what keeps him alive as a social being. And this is a concept that we talk about a lot in CPI, right? The idea of living biologically versus living spiritually, right? That yes, human beings are social creatures, and that we have these needs. We have needs for a need for companionship, and we have these basic needs to feed ourselves, etc. But that beyond that, human beings are also, we have this desire to enact our own will and to make the world serve us. We have a notion of, and that is really what it means to be human. Part of what it means to be human, what it means to be alive spiritually, is enacting your will on the world, trying to change the world, trying to make the world a better place for you and your loved ones. More so than even having a family or et cetera, or reproducing, or these things that we consider to be biological needs. Caleb looked like he had something to say.
Nope. I'm just agreeing, and I find it amazing how much of an overlap there is between innovationism and Juche. It's very inspiring.
Right. He even said living biologically. Did you even know he said that?
No, I didn't actually.
Yeah. So yeah, human beings that, we have these biological needs, right? But there's also this spiritual quality that we have. We have a want to master the environment. And that and the ruling class, they love to reduce human beings to animals, right? They want us to live purely biologically. And part of that is like, there's this idea that like the kind of person who embodies this independence, right? This is the big part of like the libertarian ideology, the sort of person, Elon Musk pretends to be this kind of person, even though they're not, right? The idea of a person who is, their own man, right? And they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, right? And they did it all by themselves, and they built their business and this and that, right? And while obviously we can acknowledge that actually, no, human beings are social creatures, and that there is no person who's actually self-made, right? And that you being able to master your environment in that way, that's a good thing, but it was also empowered by other people, and you do have a duty to society. You have a duty to society as well. But there's also like this liberal idea that it's like, well, if you weren't empowered by like these bourgeois institutions to do whatever you weren't, like these so-called meritocratic institutions, that makes you like a bad person, right? That a human being having their independence, that having their own, having their, as he puts it, integrity, right? And going against the grain, that makes you a bad person. And that's a huge part of this like Malthusian culture that we live in. So
I would
think we
say
can
they
move
don't
on to the
even
next slide.
treat us like animals. That's a very animals. Like there's laws that prevent horses from hot, but there's no laws to prevent anyone from working in an Amazon shop when it gets too hot. They see us as less than machines. That's how they see us. I mean, like I said, at least if we were animals, they would treat us better. But no, they see us as, having less worth than a machine.
Well, it's an interesting contradiction, right? Because it's like they love victims, right? They love a victim because a victim has no agency, right? And an animal is like this poor, helpless creature that can be a victim, and also it embodies, right, Mother Gaia or whatever. It embodies. You can view the animal as like this helpless creature, which is just a victim of these evil human beings who have like taken over, right? They view us, you're right, Jessica, they view us as less than animals. They view us as a disease on Mother Earth or something like that to be eradicated. And so I've often heard like people who have completely absorbed this sort of stuff, they're always really into like veganism, right? Richard Dawkins, he had a thing, future like animal supremacy will be looked on the same level as like slavery or white supremacy. Or human supremacy will be looked on the same level as, because human beings are obviously just another animal. And so if you eat meat or if you use animal products, that will be looked on in the same way as owning a slave. And obviously that's ridiculous. And what he doesn't realize that he's saying that he thinks that like human beings or that black people are on the level of like horses or something. But yeah, I mean, it's this really sick worldview that the ruling class has.
I want to hear what Unanimous has to say on this.
Dawkins was a weirdo. I don't know if he's still alive, but that guy's a weirdo. Like
yeah, I
he'll
mean,
just
he
say
always
random
he
things
always
that
like couches
explain
his
the
language in
like,
little
Zionist.
yeah, and also plausible deniability. He's like, there's a Twitter post where he's like, I'm not saying we should have, you know, what he literally said something like, I'm not saying like, he's like, I'm not saying we should have eugenics, but I'm just saying it could work. You know what I'm saying? That's a scientific argument. And it's like, bro, that's not true. Like the diseases came back that the Nazis tried to get rid of and stuff like that.
No. It's weird to me that almost every person in the new atheist movement ended up becoming like a new writer. Like they became like a new right European supporter, like a supporter of European new right parties.
What's interesting is actually it was 50-50. It was like half of them became like Nazis and like the other half became woke. You know, you had a lot of them who became like woke hipsters. And a lot of the ones that became new right, even right when BreadTomb came around, like that was a big thing that Vosh would do, is like he would take people who used to be new atheists, right, and then they became neo-Nazis, and then he would be like, okay, but it's like okay for you because like we're all neckbeards here, you know what I mean? So yeah, that was a really interesting phenomenon, but it's like two expressions, right, of this like decay of a bourgeois ideology, right? It's like they view human beings as animals, and so there's like two ways you can like go ultra woke and socially manage it that way, right? Or you can manage the population through like eugenics outright and white supremacy.
It's weird. It's like,
I mean, this
is a weird thing with the modern new right, like right-wing young men either become an anti-Semite or anti-Muslim. Like it's weird. Like you're either like some guy who makes weird neo-Likudnik propaganda, or you just become like a Nazi. There's something about that, like people who are attracted to it that are just, they're not idiots, they're just antisocial. And they're idiots. They're antisocial and they're idiots.
I mean, I'll speak to my experience, but I guess it looks like Tim is about to say something. He hasn't spoken much first. So
I was going to say that I'm not surprised that Dawkins holds that position on veganism. I think it's a class-based thing where I'm not saying there's anything wrong with veganism or vegetarianism, but I've noticed that especially early, very zealous ones, they tend to be kind of professionals on doing very well. And I try to make the case to them that if we can't even care about human life, how could we even begin to care about animals' life? Because I mean, animals are not as valuable as people. And I mean, I love animals and everything, but they're just not. We have to value human life first, and that includes development.
I mean, I just want to speak a little bit on my experience with the new atheist movement, because it was a really big deal when they came out of nowhere. And that, nowadays, if you are an evangelical Christian, it is your choice. And until Richard Dawkins and until Twitter and Facebook and all of that, a lot of people were in that just because their family was, just because they lived in an area where everybody did that and they just kind of went along with it. And that changed when Richard Dawkins was everywhere and social media was everywhere. Suddenly, to be an evangelical now is very much a choice. It's not something you go along with. And that a lot of these new atheist guys, from my understanding, were from like evangelical families they got online, and being a new atheist was kind of their way of being smart and like kind of defying their family. Right. And that, you know, it was like, well, you know, my family, they're all stupid evangelicals, but I am a smart, like, new atheist on the internet. And that it became like very much an online culture, and a lot of like ridiculing people, like, haha, look at this person, he believes in a talking snake. Oh, that's so stupid. You know, a lot of like kind of ridiculing people and making fun of them for being religious. And like, we're very smart because we're kind of chronically online. That's kind of what new atheism turned into. And it was a lot of like people who grew up in kind of a very like stifling, intellectually stifling environment around kind of the like mainline megachurch culture that was very, you know, it didn't get into religion very deeply, right? I think it was just kind of God loves you and you should believe just because, you know, and so it was kind of a reaction to that. And the reason they called them new atheists is because until Richard Dawkins, generally atheism was associated with communism. The word atheist does come from the French Revolution, right? And that atheist was considered a leftist thing, and the new atheists are not. And actually, a lot of them are like Ayn Rand. They think that they're the Ubermensch. You know, they think, you know, compassion is a form of weakness, and you know, and it also, there's a real kind of overrepresentation of that kind of person who's on the spectrum. You know, and kind of associates, you know, sees themselves as kind of the great smart person who society doesn't recognize. That's kind of the Ayn Rand kind of complex, I think. That's kind of my experience, but I mean, this may not be everyone else's experience.
Can you hear me, Caleb?
I can't.
No, I mean,
it was
oh,
just.
sorry.
I would consider myself an agnostic, but I think something I observed when I went to, I had family members who were in one of these traditional churches. There is a culture in certain American religions, not all of them, but I think the circles of Christianity you're talking about, where basically you're not allowed to ask about other religions, you're not allowed to ask about atheism, you're not allowed to ask about Islam, even Hinduism, Buddhism. Like there's like the pastor's the only guy who's allowed to be, I guess, smart. Like, trust in the pastor, you know.
Let's hear from this new guy, Joe.
Oh, there. Sorry. I know it's a digression from Juche, so keep in mind I haven't shaved yet, so I got off work. But I listen in a lot of the time.
Are you just pill eater, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
okay. So
yes.
I know who you are. Go on.
Yes. But you know, I mean, not to digress off Juche, but just hearing what you're saying about some of the Ayn Rand libertarian stuff and what's with the Peter Singer. I come from that academic background, and I was kind of shocked to know, you know, they call it applied ethics. Bioethics is another term. They talk about an Anthropocene. But like Noah was saying, what they tend to do is say, you know, which downplay humanity. We're all the same. And in a weird science fiction narrative you hear from philosophers like Timothy Morton, it kind of becomes like, you know, object-oriented ontology that move away from humanity. The singularity is going to come. Robots. I know it sounds science fiction, but they're talking about this, and it's based on Peter Singer and this ideal, and they talk about, well, it's a possibility that will, you know, all become of this. And it is really, I think, rooted in pessimism, this kind of downplay of everything. And honestly, when I was in politics too, still am, you see this in the far right spaces where the far right says, well, to be right wing, we're just unequal and might is right. And like you said, there's this very strange social Darwinian, Malthusian-esque ideal that I think you're right, comes from Ayn Rand, where we deserve at the top, and we don't like it if anyone gains wealth. And maybe just to sum it up real quick, Alexander Dugin had a tweet recently about, you know, the point of this is to grow wealth for everyone. Well, a lot of people on the far right just misconstrued it and say, well, this is bad because then we would have to downplay ourselves with people who are not like ourselves, and it gets mixed up with meritocracy and things like that. And I just find it very strange, honestly. And I think today to say that you self-identify as right is just kind of a trap to put you in that social Darwinian category. And it's irrational, like saying that, you're either an anti-Semite or you're not. And I just find it's just less of a criticism of liberalism and more becoming the very thing that they hate. But that's to my 2 cents, but just going on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common thing, and I think it's because social Darwinism is really the ideology of the ruling class, and that if you're not like being conscious about the way that you're going about things, a lot of people will just tend to default to what they've been taught and not realize that that's even what they're doing. There are a lot of people, especially in American culture, right? Americans, they have to feel like they're doing something edgy even when they're just the establishment. I've noticed that all the time. It's like they have to feel like they're saying something edgy, like libertarians or right wingers who hate China. Like they feel like they're sticking it to the man by saying what mainstream media already says about a country like China or like North Korea or like Russia. That's a very common thing. Liberals do it too. They all like, you have to feel like you're saying something edgy by saying, and I see that too. It's like when the Avengers movie came out with Thanos or whatever, there was a lot of people who felt like they were saying something edgy by saying, oh, well, Thanos was kind of right about overpopulation and stuff like that. It's like, well, no, that's like, you think you're saying something edgy, but that's what they want you to think. That's a little aside.
No, a great example of that was when I was reporting from the United Nations, I would see buses of school kids that would come to the UN for like tourism, kind of things. One of them was an Amnesty International club from a high school pulled up. And it was like 5 or 6 young, like teenage boys, and they all had shirts on that said "Free North Korea." Like it was so ridiculous. Like you're calling for the USA to overthrow a government that we're taught to hate. Like, and it looked like punk rock or something. Free North Korea. Like it was some kind of punk rock, like, edgy, like, yeah, we got to free North Korea, and it's like, instead of free Mumia Abu Jamal or, free a political prisoner, free North Korea from Kim Jong-Un. It was just so stupid.
Yeah.
Or the free Tibet.
In some ways, it's like they've hijacked a good part of American culture, right? Americans have this like independent mindset, like we have to feel like we're cowboys or something like that. And so like the mainstream has just figured out with like rock and roll and stuff like that. It's just like, well, we can make people think that like they're being really edgy by repeating the party line.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't like the status quo. If you can get them to believe the status quo is like the Soviet Union, or it's like China, or it's like North Korea, or it's like Iran, then you can basically get them to believe anything.
Yeah, very true.
But
American.
Sorry, Ken.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, but it's also being done to make people bereft of hope. So if you think that the Soviet Union is so horrible and Stalin murdered like whatever 200 million people, which is so absurd, but I actually have heard these numbers, then you're not going to aspire to anything better. And by the way, I heard this from Chomsky. Chomsky said we have to make sure that the American working class will accept starvation and homelessness and even their own extermination because they can't think and imagine anything better. And one of the things that we have to do is attack the Soviet Union. And it doesn't matter. We can make up anything about the Soviet Union. We can say Stalin killed 200,000 people. No one will question it. Because we can media.
I had this exact same experience about debating about Mao with a Falun Gong member, and I would have expected a little better from Noam Chomsky, but I guess we can't expect anything good from him.
He's an agent.
And he was on the Epstein list. I don't know.
It's a total fed.
Me of this one episode of this show I used to watch called The Boondocks. And it's basically this character has an abusive dad, and the dad smacks him and is like, "Did I just catch you wanting to be something?" Like, that's what our leaders want us to do. They're basically an abusive dad who just smacks us for wanting to believe in anything.
Right. I mean, well, like the FBI, right? What was the first mission the FBI ever did was that they tried to rig a boxing match when the first black boxing champion would have won. Because black people might, if they saw that like there could be a black heavyweight champion of the world, they might think that they could amount to something, and that would be really, really bad for America.
Yeah, was it Joe Frazier? I think, right? Or was it?
No, Joe Frazier was in the 60s. It was.
Oh, okay. It was I forget his name, but yeah, he was the first black heavyweight champion of the world, and the FBI was like determined to like pay him off, to make him lose the fight, because they were convinced that if the black people of America saw that a black man could beat a white man and be the heavyweight champion, they would all like rise up and revolt against the government or something. It's so stupid.
Yeah.
Jack Johnson.
His name was Jack Johnson, I guess. But yeah, it was a very dumb thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
we're a little strapped for time, so I think we should go to our next book.
Ward Churchill's History of the FBI, COINTELPRO papers has good stuff on that. But anyway,
yeah. So next quote. Man is also a being with creativity, that is, a creative social being. Creativity is an attribute of social man who transforms the world and shapes his destiny consciously. By virtue of his creativity, man can transform nature and society to be more useful and beneficial to him by changing the old and creating the new. Creativity, like independence, constitutes an essential quality of human beings, the social being. Independence finds expression mainly in man's position as master of the world. Creativity is expressed mainly in man's role as a transformer of the world. Right. Human beings, through our creativity, we master and change the environment. And man is also a conscious being, a being with consciousness. That is a conscious social being. Consciousness is an attribute of social man, which determines all his endeavors to understand and reshape the world and himself. Because he has consciousness, development reshapes and advances nature and society as he desires. Consciousness guarantees the independence and creativity of man, the social being, and ensures his purposeful cognition and practice. And then he continues, independence, creativity, blah, blah, blah. Nature is the object of man's labor and also is the material source of his life. Society is a community where people live and conduct activities, but nature, environments, and social conditions have a great effect on human activity. Whether natural environments are good or bad, and in particular, whether the political and economic systems of a society are progressive or reactionary, these factors may favorably affect human endeavor to remake nature and develop society or limit and restrict that activity. But man does not merely adapt himself to environments and conditions. By his independent, creative, and conscious activity, man actively transforms, changing as he desires what does not meet his needs and replacing what is outdated and reactionary with what is new and progressive. This is man's endeavor and struggle to change and transform the world into one that serves man better. Which I think that's such a gorgeous way of looking at the world. So I guess I'll just read the last quote and then we can talk a little bit. So as history advances, man's position as role and master of the world is strengthened, and the role of the extent of people's domination over the world increases daily through their independent creativity and conscious struggle. In our time, the masses of the people have emerged as true masters of the world, and through their struggle, the world is being changed more and more to serve the masses. Today, the position of role of the masses, of the masters of the world, are becoming stronger than ever before. This reality proves more patently the validity and vitality of the principle of Juche philosophy, that man is the master of everything and decides everything. As human beings master the cosmos, right? As human beings change our environment, as we invent new things, as we master new forms of energy, as the anti-colonial revolutions emerge throughout the world, as new anti-imperialist governments break the will of imperialism and assert man's independence, right? And our human beings as independent and free of subjugation. And as we assert our will more and more as social beings, it's really, I really like that's a hopeful ending, right? That the world is, as the world gets better, as we continue to improve, it more and more proves the Juche ideology, I guess you could say. But yeah, did folks have anything to say about that? Unanimous. Looks like he had something. No? Okay. You unmuted and then remuted him. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, the idea of a human being as these three things: independence, consciousness, sociality, and creativity, is really, it's something that's unique. I mean, and there's always been these, philosophy has always grappled with the idea of what it is that makes a human unique, right? There's the famous story of Plato said that a human being is a featherless biped, right? And that Diogenes, I don't know if this actually happened. It probably didn't. And I don't really believe that Plato was a real person either, but, you know, nor was Socrates or for that matter. I think Aristotle made them up. But you know, that Diogenes came in and he plucked a chicken and with all of its feathers. And he came in and he said, look, I found Plato's man, right? It's a featherless biped. You have the story of Soren Kierkegaard. He believed that he's a famous existentialist that these leftists love. And he's also loved on like certain aspects of conservatives. They like him because he wrote some stuff about like Christianity, Fear and Trembling, which is about the story of Isaac and Abraham. It's like Christian morality or something, right? He said something about how despair is what makes a human being, right? Because despair is the discontinuity between ourselves as we think of ourselves and ourselves as we exist in the world. And the fact that we can recognize it makes us human. So the fact that you can be depressed about how you don't live up to your expectations for yourself, that proves that you're a human. And these are all sort of like really depressing ways of looking at human beings. I really like, you know, how the Juche audio gives you agency, how it talks about human beings as a master of the world. And it's something that is not often looked at in our society. I think a lot of people don't really view human beings as something special. I think a lot of people don't really view human beings as something that changes their environment, and they don't view their labor as something valuable. They don't understand that their labor is really the way in which they interact with the world, that your way in which you interact with the world, that is you mastering your environment, changing the world. And that's something that you should be proud of. And that is, it's really a distinguishment that makes you human. And then there's a lot of overlap, I think, with innovationism and the Juche ideology. So I think we can wrap up unless anybody has anything more to say. All right, well, we're at time, so well, thanks everybody for a great study session. I mean, I guess
we are going to put on this is a special video message I made, and then we'll put on the closing music. So I'll just put on this special video message. I'm here at a park in Brooklyn, and like many of you, I am. Oh, hold on. What? Okay. Here at a park in Brooklyn, and like many of you, I am trying my hardest not to think about the political nightmare our country is in. Rising inflation, a war against Iran that never should have happened, two big parties controlled by big monopolies and corporations and the Israel lobby. I'm trying not to think about all of that. Instead, I'm focusing on the positive, which is we're building a movement. And that is happening. The Center for Political Innovation is building a movement of working people that are educating themselves about anti-imperialism, that are organizing and building. And that's the only thing that's going to get us out of this. It's going to take a mass movement, not podcasts, but community. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation has been telling people from the beginning. We've got to build a movement where working people come together and teach anti-imperialism and assert their interests against the big monopolies. Now, we're headed toward our convention in August 15th in Chicago, and we need your help. If we're going to pull it off, we need your support. Everything costs way more at this point. Lights are way more, gas is way more, everything costs more. Our members are working people. You can shoot us $5, $20, $10, $100, whatever you can do. It'll make things go a lot easier. Our August convention is happening, August 15th in Chicago. We need you to support us to make sure it goes as smoothly as possible. I think that as hard as it may be, we have really taken some big steps forward in solidifying our organization.
We now know much better how to work with people, how to maintain relationships, how to align with different organizations that have similar goals. We're moving ahead as an organization. We have been in a process of growing and developing, and we are getting better and better and better at what we do. So please take this time to go to cpiusa.org/donate and send us a contribution so that we can do what we're getting better and better at doing every day as we prepare to move forward in the coming months. We're heading into the fall as the midterm election happens to spread an anti-imperialist message everywhere we can. Send us a contribution at cpiusa.org/donate today. We are prepared to hit the ground running this fall. We've got to solidify our ranks, so please send us a contribution so that we can make August successful.